My name is Josh, and I wanted to talk today a little bit about a passage of Scripture that I believe is essential to anybody who would call themselves a Jesus follower. It's found in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16 through 18, and it reads, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth." So this is an essential passage for anybody who would call themselves a Jesus follower, because it puts that central theme on love. You know, there are numerous verses about love your neighbor, love the Lord your God. God is love. And so when Jesus came into this earth, he was the mortal embodiment of God and of love. And the person who wrote this, the Apostle John, was considered Jesus' best friend. They had such an intimate relationship that John would, at times be actually leaning up against him. And, you have to have a pretty intimate relationship for somebody to be laying on you, because otherwise that can get a little awkward at times. But in this particular passage, John is reminding everybody, and he's reminding the church, that love is the center of everything, and that everything we do should be rooted in love. Now, you could go throughout history and see the numerous movies, books, songs that have been written about love. But you have to ask yourself the question, what does it really mean to love? What exactly is John trying to tell us? And in this particular case, John is telling us two distinct things about what it means to love. And the first one is that love is putting another person first, putting the other person first. So when Jesus Christ died on the cross for us, he put us at the forefront. He said, I love you so much that I'm willing to lay down my life. That it's not about me, it's not about my thing, it's about redeeming the world. It's about bringing back all of humanity. And if you read the passages, and right immediately before this, and starting in verse 11, it says, "This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. So John specifically uses this example of Cain to demonstrate that selfish actions are the exact opposite of love. Because Cain gave his offerings with the hope that he was going to be revered as the Holy One, that he was going to be accepted by God, that he would be given this, righteous standing. But when all of it came down to Abel, and God said that Abel's offerings were great and Cain's weren't, that made Cain mad. Why? Because Cain was focused on himself. Cain only cared about him. Cain cared about Cain, and it put himself in a position of acting out in a bad way because his evil heart took over. Another example, when you go back throughout the Bible, is Jonah. In chapter 4, Jonah admits openly to God, I ran away, I got on a boat and fled the other direction because I knew your grace and I knew your love and I knew you were going to save the Ninevites, and I didn't want that to happen. So, see, that is not love. That's not what God called Jonah to do. God told Jonah, go and preach this message and have them turn. Jonah didn't want that. His own selfish agenda took over. His hatred for these people overtook the love of God. And it resulted in him being kind of put in a timeout until he realized that, you know what, it's not my plan. It's all about God's plan, and I'm going to do what God told me to do. So it's just another example of the love of God and loving other people requires you to put their well-being first. It requires you to put them above all else. And another thing you read about in here, when it says, or in verse 13, it says, "Do not be surprised, my brothers, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in him." Now, I think this is an important part of that passage because it reminds us of that coming from death to life. Now, love requires us to be alive, and it requires us to be alive in the Spirit and alive in Jesus, because when we're dead, obviously we have no feeling, we have no emotional, there's no attachment. One Bible teacher actually wrote about in Ephesians 2, when Paul was talking to the Ephesians about being brought from death to life, that that particular word wasn't dead as in mortally not there anymore, because obviously that wouldn't make any sense. Because if we were dead, then that would assume that all of us have been resurrected prior to our salvation, that we would have all been not breathing, we would have all been brain dead, and then God resurrected us all to life. And that's not exactly the case. That doesn't make sense in the long run. But this Bible teacher, he was talking about this particular passage, and he noted that this word referred to being in a state of being desensitized. It means that we are completely unaware of God. We're unaware of the surroundings around us. We are just emotionally numb. That's why when somebody is sleeping or when somebody's off in a trance, they say, oh, well, that person's dead to the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that their brain has ceased functioning. It just means that they are not aware of anything around them. And when we read this passage about how Jesus has brought us from death to life, it means that he has brought us back to an awareness of the world around us. He has brought us back to a place where we're sensitive to God's call. We're sensitive to the people around us, and we start to see them, and we start to see their needs and what they need out of us. And another verse when he states in here is that it says, don't be surprised if other people hate you. And he doesn't say anything about going around looking for haters. He doesn't mean looking at people and being judgmental toward them and inciting hatred. He's basically saying there are people out there that are going to hate you, and the love of God is going to make you aware of this, and it's going to help you get past it. You're going to look beyond it and say, well, that person was mean to me, so I'm going to be mean right back to them. No, it looks beyond that and says, hey, this person's being mean to me. Why is that? Why are they being mean to me? I don't know. So you're going to look and find out why that is. So loving is looking beyond yourself and actually seeing the other person. The second part of it is the call to action. Love is not a feeling. It's not a thought. It's not a admirable devotion that we have to somebody else. It is an actual propelling to action. So when you read this verse here in verse 17, it says, if anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? So if your best friend says, I have no gas, I can't get to work, you have $10 in your wallet, and you just say, oh yeah, I hope you find some gas money, and then you go about your way, how can you say that you love God? Or how can you say the love of God is in you? How can you love your neighbor if you're completely refusing to act on it? If you're not willing to move, to do something, how can you say that you're loving anybody? Jesus Christ died on the cross. He gave his life. He actually went. He moved. He did it. And that's something that falls on all of us too. And if you actually look in the in the gospel account, never once does Jesus actually say the words, I love you, to anybody. Jesus knows that saying I love you really doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. It's showing people. Because if people can't see it, they don't believe it's real. Take, for instance, a husband and a wife. A husband can say I love you 100 times a day, and the wife may never pick up on it or register it. But when a husband brings flowers home, when he takes her out on a date, when he rubs her feet after a hard day, or compliments her cooking, those are things that show the love of the husband. And those are the things that are going to stick with the wife. That's how the wife knows that her husband loves her, because she sees it in action. And if we're not acting out our love, then ultimately it's going to fall on deaf ears. Me personally, I can kind of attest to something similar to this, because when I was about 12, 13 years old, my dad had promised that he was going to buy us tickets to, or me and my sister, that he was going to buy us tickets to Arizona to come meet with him. However, when the time came and my actual birthday rolled around, he called me and told me that he messed up, that he flaked out on us, and that he had no way to get the tickets and he didn't have the money, so we weren't going to be able to go. I was devastated. I actually spent probably an hour in my garage crying because, in my opinion, my dad didn't love me. He didn't care. And so when you take that reverse, you take that position and you reverse it to the other side, that's how the world feels when they look at the church. They say, you know what? If you're not showing me that you love me, then I don't believe you actually do love me. You know, there was a movie, the Academy Award winner for this past year, which was called Spotlight, and it was a movie about exposing Catholic priests who were sexually molesting kids. And the hardest part about that whole thing was that the church knew about it. The church was covering it up. So, in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of the non believing community, they look at us and say, well, you don't actually love us. If you loved us, you know, if you actually loved, you would actually show it to us. You wouldn't be hiding in the shadows. You wouldn't be acting so selfishly. You wouldn't be acting like you're all that really matters. So, in order for us to actually love, we have to see the people of the world. We have to look at them and see beyond ourselves. But once we see that, we have to be compelled and willing to act. And just like John was telling the church, if you're not doing it, then it's going to ultimately fall on deaf ears. The world is never going to accept the message of love. It's never going to come. They're never going to come to Jesus Christ. So we have to take that time to examine ourselves. Are we acting selfishly? Are we only taking into account our desires? Or are we taking into account what the world needs? And if the world needs that love, are we willing to give it to them? And I think that's the foundation of this passage, and I think it's the foundation of everything that a Jesus follower needs to embody. So I hope that you all find this message blessed, and I hope you stay blessed. Have a great day.